announcing the 1916 Company app, fully redesigned, available on the Apple App Store and Google Play, combining new watches from many brands with more being added all the time, and our traditionally vast collection of pre-owned luxury timepieces. A redesigned homepage, a natural departure point for trading, browsing our inventory, and checking out our studio originals. Build your online wish list, a virtual collection that allows you to leverage all of the makes, models, and reference numbers in our databases. And seamless trading. Contact your advisor, forward pictures, get an estimate, and choose your next match from our vast online inventory. All of this on the 1916 Company app, available on Google Play and the Apple App Store.
One big piece of news this year, which is not going to see fruit until I think 2026, was the Breitling's announcing the Rebirth of Universal Geneve.
Yeah, that was an interesting one. Where are they going with that? Is it trying to meet a price point or a customer or a volume?
I have absolutely no idea. I mean, it looks like they're trying to be as true as possible to the qualities of Universal Geneve, both as a brand and technically as a watch, which made it a favorite among vintage watch collectors. I mean, they have come out, they came out with 3 unique pieces that were built around vintage micro-rotor movements. And the website is up, which I wasn't expecting this relatively early in the game. And I mean, it is absolutely replete with images that are designed to give people a sense of confidence that the brand is in good hands. And I think
it's certainly well funded.
Yeah. I mean, I think that after what George Kern has done with Breitling and how he's really brought the heritage of the brand and the history of the brand back into the conversation, I feel pretty confident that he's got the skill set necessary to bring Universal Geneve back. But of course, the big question is, how much are these watches going to cost?
That's the big question, because I could easily see a situation if they were not premium priced, like let's say everything is under $8,000, then there's a world in which where you have one brand that's mostly focused on contemporary watches that are in the tradition of their historical watches, but not literally re-editions. And then you've got this other brand that is built around the idea of nostalgia every day, all the time, in every model line.
Right.
So I see room for that sort of double-tiered sort of structure where you've got the Tudor Black Bay, the Heritage Chrono, the nostalgic type appeal, and then on Breitling you've got a more premium priced watch. You've got more modern designs. I think what he found out was doing the re-editions, like the Copilot AVI, like doing the Navitimer 1959, Super Ocean Heritage 57, that there was a huge amount of interest in a full-time line that did nothing but that. And I think Breitling can't be taken over by vintage re-editions, but if you start essentially from a dormant brand that is only known to historically literate collectors, then maybe you can make it whatever you want if what you want is full-time re-editions and historically designed watches. Smaller cases, no-date dials, very true reproductions of past models, albeit with more modern movements. I don't think it'll all be new old stock forever. And if they can scale that and keep the price down, I could see a very Tudor-style marketing thrust, a little bit like what Tudor did from really the beginning of the Heritage Chrono all the way through I guess you could say they're still going. They're still a very nostalgically directed brand, and I think that's what he wants to do.
So, I mean, I was thinking about something we were talking about at the beginning of this conversation, which is that there really isn't one immediately obviously noticeable narrative through line for kind of the entire year. But one of the things that I've noticed on watch social media and to a certain extent in brand communication is that there's an awful lot of diversity. There's a sense of people kind of looking for something that's not the usual subject, So we went through the vintage stainless steel, and the vintage sort of craze in general, starting, back in 2013, 14, 2015, and then of course we went through the hype watch era, where there was not a stainless steel integrated bracelet sports watch that people didn't want, and producing one was an easy way to get attention, especially if you've never done it before. But now, we did an interview with Phil Toledano last month where he talked about the geezer watch phenomenon, which he feels is apparently already played out just because the internet moves that quickly.
Yeah.
But that's something that couldn't have happened 5 years ago. Like people would not have been the least bit, and people were in fact not the least bit interested in quirky, precious metal, 1970s or 1970s adjacent designs, which, they might have very, very high quality movements in them, but that's not really what the watch was about, in a sense. So we have that going on. And, I feel like a lot of people have done their first round of enthusiast watch collecting, right?
It's now a more
now they're looking for
mainstream
something.
hobby.
Yeah, well, that's another thing.
There's that, and I would also say social media will burn you out pretty quickly if you don't have like a self-directed kind of taste. Like if you just take what's being pushed to you and you don't push back against the current, you're going to burn out on the same couple of watch models and brands very quickly. And that's sort of why I say with all of these accessibly priced but exclusive watches, it feels like we've got micro brands on the one hand and other companies that are trying to get a piece of the micro brand action, and this ability to maybe make a change to a dial or a change to a strap or change the case size and create a new edition, this time in titanium. That sort of helps people outrun the exhaustion that occurs from seeing the same stuff on social media.
Yeah.
Because among other things now, anyone with a budget and a phone can call up either Sellita or Schwarz-Etienne and get them to make an entire watch. I mean, it worked incredibly well for Havid Nagan. You go to Schwarz-Etienne, Ming, manufacturing partner at Schwarz-Etienne. You can go and find people who will make the case, the dial, the movement, package it, regulate it, send it to you, and you can brand it. And it's much easier to create a brand now. You don't have to be a lifelong watchmaker who's reached the peak of his profession and now you're putting your name on a watch. You can do it right out of college almost.
Right.
Your graduating thesis can be a business plan for a micro brand. And so you do have this explosion of diversity, both from OEMs who are trying to keep up with the churn of changing tastes and from micro brands, of which there have never been more. A success story at Zenith. So, okay, for a long time, Zenith seemed like it was a place where executive careers went to die. After Jean-Frédéric Dufour rode success with Zenith to the top of
biggest
Rolex.
job in the business.
Yeah, really, on the strength of about half a decade with Zenith, which was an incredible half decade, he won the Director General, basically CEO seat at Rolex. So it was a huge audition for the biggest job in the business. But after that, there were a lot of people who came and went kind of anonymously. At one point, Jean-Claude Biver had to take it over directly. And I think Julien Tournaire was the first person who really, since Jean-Frédéric Dufour, who went into that seat, succeeded with it and was rewarded, because now he's moved up, he's going to be in charge of Hublot. And Ricardo Guadalupe, for a long time, was the successor to Jean-Claude Biver. He's going to be taking on more of a ceremonial role. So Tournaire is now probably the first successful Zenith brand head in basically a decade at this point. And he's now moving into the seat at a brand that 6-7 years ago, we would have considered head and shoulders the leading LVMH watch brand. Can he rediscover the magic that Hublot had 6-7 years ago?
That's going to be an interesting trick. The world is not what it was.
That's true.
And one of the jumping back to the beginning of the year, one of the interesting things about the Hublot booth and about Mr. Guadalupe was that they were talking about their technical prowess. And, I kind of think in anticipation of some of the challenges that their normal approach might be facing, they were really emphasizing and messaging on their status as a movement manufacturer.
And they are a tremendous movement manufacturer. People don't realize that in 2010, when B&B Concept was going bust in the middle of the financial crisis, Hublot had a decision to make: let it fail and lose access to high complications, or buy the thing and move it in-house as their MP division, and they did.
Right.
Hublot's had ultra-thin movements made in-house, like the 1300. There's the 10-day Meccano set inspired Mecca 10, which is all their execution. And today, when the time comes to do chiming watches and tourbillon and complex calendars, they do have the ability to do that themselves. And the brand has changed. Classic Fusion, once seen as a sort of entry-level Hublot, is now the main event. The King Powers at 48 millimeters are gone. Some of the more outlandish collaborations and cross-promotions are now gone. Classic Fusion is not necessarily a small Hublot, but it's definitely a more reserved and wearable Hublot. And with that,
it's a rather beautiful watch, too.
Yeah, there are some excellent example examples, like that Caliber 1300 Ultra Thin in the Classic Fusion case. Oh my gosh. So I do think that Julien Tournaire, thanks to first Jean-Claude Biver and later Ricardo Guadalupe, does have an impressive array of tools to use to maybe redefine what Hublot is going to mean in the 2020s, or in the second half of the 2020s. Now, another big management change, the return of Jérôme Lambert at Jaeger-LeCoultre.
That was unexpected. That was definitely unexpected. When I first got to know Jérôme, he was CEO at Jaeger, and he seemed like the perfect man for the job. He's probably the perfect man for the job again. Jaeger could really use his, I think that they would really benefit from his presence again. The challenge that Jaeger has is that their most identifiable watch, with good reason, is the Reverso, which is a classic of modern watch design. They have, it's been an effort for Jaeger to kind of get the same amount of attention on Polaris, for example. You know, I mean, which are interesting watches with an interesting historical base, but they don't bring the same sort of heat to the brand that Reverso does. Now, I don't know if anything ever could, but I mean, Jérôme is he's a pretty restlessly inventive guy, and it's going to be interesting to see what comes out of his stewardship of the brand over the next few years.
Without a doubt. He was originally CEO of Jaeger-LeCoultre from 2002 to 2013, and in hindsight, it's looked at as something of a golden era for the brand, which is saying something considering how far back its history goes and how many golden eras they've had. And some of the hallmarks of the period, investment in traditional lines, but also in addition to things like, you know, the Reverso ultra-thin tribute to 1931, there were arrays of complications from alarms to pusherless chronographs to tourbillon regulators that broke pricing barriers and won chronometry contests.
Yeah. The Extreme Lab.
Exactly. Complications, and not always ones that you couldn't buy. Like, it's pretty cool to see something like a Helio Tourbillon perpetual calendar this year, but there's been a real disparity at JLC since he left between watches that seemed maybe a little bit pedestrian, but reasonably priced, and things that were unbelievably complicated and expensive, but for that reason unavailable. I think really the hallmark of Jérôme Lambert's first run was that complications were made more affordable, and even some of the high-end stuff was more accessible than you would think it would be. Yeah. Like the Master Compressor Extreme Lab 2, that was like a $50,000 watch. If RM built that, if Richard Mille launched something like that, it would have been $1 million watch. So there was excellent value for money in complications during his first run, and he was not afraid to launch things that were a little bit eccentric. Some of the compressor crown pieces were definitely that. The Amvox series, I think everyone was very cynical about where that was going to go, and it turned out to be one of probably the best and most committed car watch crossovers. They say you can't go home again, so I'm not automatically saying all this is going to happen again. The industry's changed. You can get a perpetual calendar from Baume & Mercier. The bar has been raised. Everyone has complications now that are affordable. Everyone has watches that are great value for money. And it's very difficult to stand out, even within the Richemont group, when there are so many overlapping options in each complication, price, and category, like sports watch, dive watch, pilot's watch. So he's got two challenges. One, try to recapture the magic, and two, coming back down from a corporate job at Richemont to running a brand, try to figure out how to set that brand apart, because that's a big family, Richemont, and sometimes it can be tough to stand out in the crowd. Now, in terms of events, in the fall we had two competing events, and I went to Dubai Watch Week's Horology Forum 10 in Hong Kong, which overlapped in October almost completely with an event held by the Hourglass, a retailer in East Asia that held I Am Watch in Singapore. And I felt that although I liked the speakers and the workshops at Horology Forum 10, I think I Am Watch won that battle by bringing in a ridiculous who's who of independent watchmaking and actually having the brands on hand.
Yeah, if I had to pick one just as somebody who wants to meet the people behind the brands directly and see as much product as possible, I think I would have probably picked that. I think that Dubai Watch Week offers an opportunity to hear from people in a little bit of a different way. So I think that they're probably going after, different objectives.
The challenge is that Dubai Watch Week is exactly what I Am Watch was looking to set up this year. So with Dubai Watch Week, when it's in Dubai, it's brands, it's watches, it's consumer level access to all the new pieces. It's the place to meet independent watchmakers and brand managers and try the stuff. I think going forward, I would love to see the Horology forums, which I've participated in now twice in New York and Hong Kong. I would love to try to attract actual exhibitors, because I think a speaking slate is great, but considering people can hear me online anytime they want, I do think that in a very global online media environment, you need to have creators and hardware on hand to make the travel completely worthwhile. Like, I think you travel from the United States or Europe to go to IM Watch. I think Horology Forum 10 is going to bring in people from Singapore, from Hong Kong, from China, from Japan, but I'm probably not going to make the trip from the United States if I'm not on the speaker slate, if I know I'm not going to be seeing watches.
Generally speaking, watch enthusiasts like to see watches.
That's fact. Watch Time New York.
Yeah.
What have they got going for them? Watches. So I think it's interesting to see those two events side by side, and I think the speakers and workshops that they had at Horology Forum 10 were maybe better on that level. And I think that having creators and watches on hand at IM Watch, I think maybe that's a little bit more globally relevant because people will travel for that. And next year, Dubai Watch Week gets to do a reset because they're back in Dubai. It's going to be hardware, it's going to be watchmakers, it's going to be brand managers again. I would love for Horology Forum 11 to bring in a little bit more of the crowd that exhibits at Dubai Watch Week itself. And I think that would really be great. A speaker slate, workshops, and then hardware. Make it Dubai Watch Week, but take it on the road with you. Bring the watches. Other than that, what would you like to see as a wish for 2025? This will be our capstone. What would you love to see in 2025?
I don't know. I mean, I feel like my crystal ball has never been cloudier. There's so much uncertainty in the world in general. And the kind of status of luxury is something that I think the industry, the watch industry needs to think about, and the luxury industry needs to think about. We exist in terms of social media. Phil referred to the rage economy, or the outrage economy.
The outrage. It's both.
Yeah, exactly.
It's both.
And one of the great things about luxury is that, in general, is that it can function as a repository for culture.
Yes.
For lack of a better word. And one of the things that I don't want to say problem, because it's hard to characterize something as a problem if it's something that's happened kind of organically as a result of the nature of the beast. But one of the things that has happened is that watch collecting has become very commodified. Prices are going up everywhere.
And racing ahead of inflation, just to be clear.
And things get more and more expensive every year. And a lot of the conversation has, especially for the last 4 or 5 years, has been about, having access to things that are very, very expensive, but that don't necessarily represent real horological value, which is not to say that they're not worth what you paid for them. I mean, worth is something that somebody has to decide on their own. And there are different ways of expressing value. Having something that shows you have access is a genuine expression of value if that's what you're into. But when there's too much money around, it's hard to see the watches.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I'd also say that's sort of opening the door for a lot of those micro brands, or if you have something like the Mad 1 or the Tudor Chrono Pink, brands that are trying to get a piece of the micro brand market, even though they are themselves larger companies. So what I would like to see going forward is I'd like to see a stabilization of the marketplace in Asia. I think it's very obvious that Hong Kong and mainland China have suffered immensely over the last several years, and Hong Kong was suffering even before COVID because of protests and political unrest. So I would love to see a rebound in the East Asian market, because I really feel like culturally that is the watch collector community's center of gravity. I think the industry is in Europe, but the collector heart and soul is in East Asia. And I would like to see that recover, because I think it's important for watch communities globally to have a robust East Asian market where people are engaged and feel like, at the very least, there's stability, that it's not just going to be double-digit declines month after month, quarter after quarter. In terms of things I would love to see, I would love to see thinner watches across the board. I think everything from your pilot's watch to your dive watch to your dress complication can be thinner. And I do think that brands like Bulgari and Piaget are taking the lead in this regard, and it's not just because they have historic competence in it. I really think it's what the marketplace wants. And I think you've seen a little bit of give and take here and there, For example, Omega releasing more manual conversions of some of its automatics, and Breitling doing the same thing in search of ways to quickly make watches thinner. And I do think that will be the new currency going forward, because as we get past this idea that the diameter of a case determines the fit and the size, people begin to realize that other factors like thickness and lug to lug are relevant. So I would love to see thinner watches across the board, and I would love to see more of what Breitling and Omega are already doing, which is listing thickness and lug to lug on their website. So from a consumer standpoint, more information that makes it easier to eyeball size a watch for your wrist. And then finally, I would like to see one more consumer-oriented watch show in Europe and in the United States. I would like to see the comeback of the abortive Watch Time LA or something like it, where you can get all of those Watch Time New York and Dubai Watch Week exhibitors all in one place on the US West Coast. And I think that there needs to be something to challenge the dominance of Watches and Wonders, because that's still very much an inside baseball event in Europe. It's for journalists, it's for retailers. I don't necessarily think you go there as a member of the public and get a lot of access.
No,
so I would love to see something in Europe itself that is completely consumer oriented, and who knows, maybe Dubai Watch Week will find its even year groove with something like that. Just a different location and a very consumer oriented, hardware oriented, continental European watch show. So that is my wish for next year. That and I'm going to second your call for lower prices. That's a good one.
Yeah, I mean, you can't lose wishing for that. The only other thought that I have is I think one specific brand I'm very interested to see where they'll go next year is Piaget, because they have found themselves through a series of historical factors and changes in tastes. Kind of like that brand right now is actually right at the center of gravity for a lot of the changes in tastes and preferences that are occurring online. You know, speaking of the whole
and they won the iconic prize this year.
They did.
The Polo.
They did. Yeah. So they have a lot of stuff in their back catalog and in their current catalog that is a great fit for where people's tastes are going, and it's a brand that's not still on people's radar as sort of a super hot brand in terms of the modern catalog, but that represents a huge opportunity, and I'm curious to see if they're going to actually go for it.
They're starting next year in pole position. Yeah. So until then, let us know in the comments below what you'd like to see in 2025, and until then, time out.